Hey guys, my name is Jordan Koss. Welcome to the Almost Essential podcast. This 16-episode series is based off my final project for my Doctorate of Ministry degree at Fuller Theological Seminary. The title of that final project is Almost Essential Evangelists, Improving Retirement Asset Accumulation for Mainstream Church of Christ Pastors. In this series, we will interview 8 different specialists in 8 separate episodes. And we will also interview 2 pastors from each of 8 different regions around the U.S. This final project was inspired by 10 years of ministry in 3 different churches of Christ from Georgia to Northern California from 2010 to 2019, as well as my time as a financial professional in training in 2020. That is where I learned about the retirement crisis America is in and will be experiencing in the coming years. Now, I have 3 goals for this podcast. 1, provide an accessible, denomination-specific qualitative conversation for Church of Christ pastors and leaders. 2, introduce leaders and listeners to retirement vehicles and strategies they may not have heard about before. And 3, provide encouragement, motivation, and knowledge to save for the last third of life. Thank you for listening and enjoy. All right, so welcome once again to the Almost Essential podcast. I am your host, Jordan Koss, and this is episode 9 of 16. We thank you for tuning in, whether you're listening to the podcast or watching on YouTube. We are looking forward to sharing with you today. The conversation is about to ensue with our Pacific Northwest pastors. But first, our co-host, Lars Coburn. Lars, say a few words about yourself.
Yeah, well, I am a Pacific Northwest guy, so I'm grateful to be with my peeps. I serve at Bushnell University, getting to help our churches, not just within the Restoration Movement, but the church in general, the kingdom of God here in this place. And I think the Pacific Northwest is often viewed as kind of this weird place on the in the country, and we've got some amazing churches and some amazing people doing some really kingdom work. And so I think if you can pay attention to some of the good stuff coming out of the Northwest, there's more going on in Portland than what you see on the news. But yeah, maybe we'll talk about that with our resident outside of the Portland metro, but still kind of in Portland, Chris Dunning from Newburgh.
Yeah.
Chris, why don't you say a little bit about yourself, and then we'll introduce Jason too.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, guys. My name is Chris Dunning. I'm the lead minister for the Newburgh Church of Christ. As Lars pointed out, we're not that far outside of the Portland metro area, probably like a 25, 30-minute drive at most, depending on your traffic. I've been here for about 3.5 years now, and I've got a couple kids, Micah, who's 14, Emma, who is 11, and my wife, Lorinda. We all moved here from Walnut Creek, California, actually, which is where I met Jordan. And so,
Yeah. We were part of a youth ministry kind of cohort team that would plan camp together every year. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Always a lot of fun working with Jordan on that. He's got like these tremendously creative ideas that also have these really deep theological groundings, and
yes,
it was always a blast to work.
Always kept it on the middle school level, right? Always kept it on the middle school level.
Oh yeah.
Now remind me, there's a university in Newburgh, right? What is it?
Yeah, George Fox University is our local university.
Okay.
Actually, our youth minister, Kyle, graduated from George Fox for his master's program.
Okay.
And we've got a number of students at Newburgh that are from the school there.
Good Quaker university.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Lots of friends churches in the area. So
okay, awesome. All right, Jason, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Jason Swick from Prineville, Oregon, which is in Central Oregon. We get to be a little bit farther, about 3 hours east of Portland and the I-5 corridor. And I've been over here for 5 years. Before that, I was at Oregon State University as the campus minister in Corvallis, and that's where I got to connect with Lars. Still trying to convert him to being a Beaver fan, but we'll work on that.
Go Ducks.
No, I like the Oregon State unis, the football unis, man. I always like their colors. Didn't they have a big win this past season?
Oh, no need to talk about this. Yes, yeah. Nike is a great contributor to both teams.
Yes.
Just a little bit more to the Ducks.
Got it. All right. Well, great. So why don't we go ahead and jump into the conversation? Again, our subject we're covering today within this podcast is how can we help Church of Christ pastors do a better job at accumulating assets for retirement? Because based upon some studies by James Knapp, they seem to be a microcosm of what Teresa Ghilarducci says is calls the American DIY retirement crisis. Perhaps an aspect of that is an over-reliance on traditional vehicles that perhaps are underperforming because in some ways, some of them that we're over-relying upon were never made to do what we're asking them to do. But question number one for you guys is you were asked to read a certain portion of the project that I've written thus far on recent surveys and research on pastors both in Church of Christ and outside greater evangelical and broader Christian surveys. So, but there was this one comment by one guy named Brandon Shields in a particular book. He said this. He says the typical unique experience of pastors is not being able to have honest and specific conversations about one's financial situation with their churches, which he then says fuels a conspiracy of silence that undermines the well-being of both pastors and their churches. And I was just wondering, did that strike you at all, or what are your thoughts on that statement? Is it true for you? Is it not, or et cetera? Go ahead.
Yeah, I think for me, when I heard that, I was like, oh yeah, that totally fits. Even my own feelings towards it, because when I go in to talk about money or even thinking about talking about money, I feel like I'm going to be viewed as, greedy. You took this vow of poverty when you came into ministry, and so there's just a negative view of it, and so it's hard to have those conversations.
Yeah, in a lot of areas of life, there's kind of this expectation that the minister has it all together, and frankly and honestly, with you guys here, I can say that's very rarely the case, that any of us feel like we have it all together. But finances are an area that's particularly touchy because, as Jason said, there's a little bit of an expectation that, well, why aren't you just doing it because you love doing it, because it's what you're called to do, because you get to serve the church. And the truth is, a lot of ministers would serve the church if they were not in full-time ministry, but they would serve significantly less by virtue of having to have some kind of employment that allows them to continue to live. And a good pay, a decent, set of financial backings allows us to be able to serve in ways that we wouldn't otherwise be able to serve. But that's a difficult conversation to have with members of the church, especially, but even with elders, with, the people who are in charge of the finances of your congregation. So yeah, it resonated with me as well. Okay.
Lars, any follow-up to that?
Well, I'm thinking about a particular story that I think Swick I don't know if you're going to tell it, but anyway, it can be pretty vulnerable, but it can be a really great way when you really need and you do present the need to the congregation, that the congregation can step up. And I don't know if you feel comfortable sharing that, Swick, but
so are you talking about what Greg did when I broke my leg? Is that the story?
That's probably the story I'm thinking of. I just remember you guys, It was pretty emotional. It was pretty charged. And it was like your first inclination wasn't to ask for help. But then, the response of the church was, I guess, different than you imagined.
Yeah. So, my background is electrical engineering. I did that for 6 years before God called me into ministry. And so I took that jump, and I was early on. I'd done a 2-year apprenticeship in West Virginia, and I was early on in Corvallis as a campus minister, and broke my leg playing basketball with the college students. And it was a small thing, but it happened at the same time that my second son was born. And so I just told my wife, I said, I don't know how we're going to pay for this. And I said, maybe we have to go back to engineering, and this just isn't going to work for us. And that Sunday morning, Greg Strawn, the preaching minister, he got up and he said, if we're going to have a minister in this place, we have to be taking care of our ministers. And he kind of laid it out there, and he put a check right up on the podium. And I had one guy, not an elder or leader in the church. He came up to me and he said, how much is your bills for your leg and your son? And I told him the figure, and he said, okay. And over the next months, he actually, I just kept getting checks and money coming in. And then he came up to me and he's like, I think 2 months later, and he's like, how much has come in? And I was like, I was crying, because I was like, all of it. They paid for everything. So
wow.
Yeah.
That's great. That's awesome. No, thanks for sharing that story. That's great. So another aspect or question I wanted to ask in terms of that the section that you read was, what did you find significant about the National Association of Evangelical Studies, a study of 4,249 senior pastors across 19 different denominations in this country? And one of those findings that they found was that the biggest financial stress factor for those pastors across 19 denominations just so happened to be saving for retirement. 92% of them, that was their biggest stress factor financially. Thoughts on that?
I was a little surprised that 92% of them were thinking about retiring.
Okay.
When I talk to a lot of ministers, yeah, there you go. When I talk to a lot of ministers, it's almost as though like retirement is off the table. And so that I make the joke, but
off the table because of a negative view, or off the table just because I'm not going to have enough money anyway, so don't even think about it?
Yeah, usually I don't know that I'm ever going to be able to afford to retire. And so, yeah, it makes sense from the standpoint that most of us, have this kind of looming idea in the background that, like, even if I retire, I'm still going to have to do something, and that's, I don't know many ministers. So the number stacks up, more than anything, that joke of, I'm surprised they found 92 that were even considering retirement. It adds up. It makes sense in my experience. Most of us have that, again, looming consideration that, like, even if I am saving, even if I do plan to retire, even if I have X number of dollars in the bank by the time I'm, 65 or whatever, will I be able to, like, fully retire or even partially retire? Right.
Yeah. Right. Jason, any thoughts on that study that you read about?
Yeah. The only thing that struck me is that it's not just pastors. Everybody's really struggling with this idea of retirement, and I didn't save, back in the past. And so it's not just in our field, but it's kind of across the board.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, and I think that goes to the role that pastors play with their church, right? If they're not able to talk about their anxiety about money because they're going to be seen as greedy, or because they just, they're worried about that vow of poverty and kind of some of those things, or being perfect, as you were talking about, Chris, and having it all together, then, sometimes we play it off, and we'll just kind of talk about retirement in these kind of assuming everybody has it all together because, well, we are the only ones who don't. And that's really missing a pastoral moment, right? Because their anxiety actually then creates distance from them and their church. I recently overheard a story from a gal who grew up in a family of 5 or 6, I think, kids, and her dad was a pastor for a long time, and he had no friends in the church because he didn't want to show favoritism. So he was one of those that took that passage in James really seriously. And I think that fuels a little bit of this too, that there's like risk, not just in financial conversations, but in all areas when we're going to show favoritism by how we spend our money or how we, are hospitable. And I think that's interesting that in this season of his life in retirement now, his daughter is saying, it's the first time I've seen my dad have friends. And how sad is that, right? That in ministry we become so isolating. But I think, retirement shouldn't just be the time when we get to have friends, but it should be one of those spaces of our life where we get to take down some of those walls and get rid of some of that distance we've created in ministry. And if we aren't able to retire, we miss out on some of those relationships and friendships that might be really, really fruitful later on. But yeah, I thought that was an interesting observation too. Yeah. If these pastors are so stressed out about this, that probably means they're not preaching from a healthy place about it and inviting their congregation to think about retirement in healthy ways too.
Yeah, you made that comment about, if they don't feel comfortable talking about it, or they don't talk about it, how does that model to the congregation thinking about these things? And it's sort of like immediately what started going off in the back of my head was, oftentimes when ministers talk about money, there's this suspicion, like if a sermon is on giving, are we behind in the budget this year? Is he angling for a raise or something like that? The funny thing is we don't do that with Jesus when he talks about money, right? We're not like, oh, that greedy Jesus, he just wanted, people to give more. It's all about, lining his pocketbook or something. Giving is something that we preach about, but oftentimes I don't know about Jason. Sometimes I feel a little awkward preaching about giving for that reason. And our congregation is not in a financially difficult position, but it still feels weird to preach about giving because it seems as though people assume that there is an encoding there that I don't intend. And I don't think our elders would intend if they asked me to preach on giving. So, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Good stuff, guys. Did you guys, when you read that NAE study, like any other thoughts on that kind of jumped out at you in terms of the statistics? Because this is like, broader before we get to the COC surveys.
I need to pull it up again because it's been like a week or so since I read it.
Yeah, no worries.
It's okay if not.
Yeah, it's okay if not. I could go on to the next question about the ACU salary survey, and then you can jump on in. Or let's talk about the Barna State of Pastors report. Now, I'm pretty sure like at least 2 or 3 of us were at Pepperdine when Barna first came out with these stats on the Barna State of Pastors report. I think that was back in 2017, 2018, if I'm correct. And
Smothers Theater.
What's that?
Yeah.
Oh, Smothers Theater. Yeah.
Sitting in Smothers. Yeah, I think I actually have it here somewhere.
Okay. Yeah. There you go. There you go. I think I was sitting in the front row listening to David Kinnaman give all the stats and info. So what the conclusion, they didn't focus too much on finances. They gave a little bit of space to it. And they basically concluded that churches need to help pastors with financial matters as one important way to help them thrive in ministry. And a cool aspect of the Barna State of Pastors report is like Pepperdine University was like a partner with Barna to produce this. And Pepperdine University, as we all know, is a Church of Christ related school. So Pepperdine University, there is attention being given to, again, the state of pastors and attention to the need for financial support of ministers related to retirement as well. Thoughts on those findings from Barna?
Well, I think it is important, and it's been good. I think Christian Chronicle has been good as well in terms of the popular side of getting some of these the state of pastors out there. And so now there's more conversations. I know within my own church here, there's kind of this upswelling of people saying, hey, we need to pay Jason more. We need to pay Jason more. And not even talking to me, but just like mentioning it and talking about it. And, and we really appreciate you. And so just having that awareness being out there of, the state of pastors has been really beneficial, I think, for those of us that are still here.
Right. Chris?
To kind of circle back around, the statistic, I was trying to remember what the specific number was that you had shared, that 58% of ministers had between $0 and $50,000 saved, but 21%, one out of five, had nothing saved. And what was surprising to me about that, first of all, that so many have nothing saved, right? But then that 0 to 50,000, that is a remarkably widespread for savings. And then I started thinking about how that might compare to the number of ministers that are nearing retirement age. If you have 21% and 58%, you've got what, 89% or 79% of ministers right there. How many of those guys are within 10 years of retirement, and they, $50,000 is not enough to retire on.
No.
0 is not enough to retire on. And we're talking about the vast majority of ministers being between those areas, from a statistical standpoint, thinking about the number of Bible majors that are graduating from our colleges, the number of individuals that are intending to go into ministry versus the number of men and women that are currently employed in ministry across the United States. We're talking about it is literally an epidemic level of people who are just completely unprepared to retire, that have to be nearing retirement age. And that was the thing that was most surprising to me, but I had to kind of refresh myself on that. So sorry to backtrack there a little bit, but you hear over and over again about the aging of, the ministry population. And that's, to me, that's those two statistics combined. And I know you can take statistics and oftentimes make them say whatever you want, but those two things together are worrisome. For a guy in his 30s, almost 40s, it's less troublesome to look at my, retirement savings accounts and say, okay, well, I'm above the median. Okay, that's good. But then it really worries me for the people who are well beyond me year wise, who are, sitting at sub $30,000, ready to retire in the next 15 years. So, yeah. And the NAE, another thing that just jumped out to me about the NAE study was the interesting finding that a lot of them were like, yeah, I'm good. I got it, everything under control. And yet the vast majority of them have very little, like you're saying, saved up for retirement. It's like, okay, there's some disconnect there. And some cognitive dissonance, right? 71% saying, yeah, I've got it under control. Things are okay. I'm pretty confident about it.
Yeah.
Then this 92% that it's a big stressor for them, and this 79% that are 50,000 to nothing, right? Yeah. That's it's really troublesome.
And I found out a little bit, like when I tried to be a financial professional back in 2020, kind of learning the ropes, meeting with people on Zoom. Talking about finances in general is difficult, and because it's so vulnerable, kind of revealing information about that. It's just I encountered, I guess, at least that mentality, like, yeah, I'm good. Yeah. I don't need whatever I'm not even aware of anyway at the moment.
Yeah.
Because not being aware of something also kind of like, I don't know about that. But moving on to the Church of Christ surveys and data, we have the ACU salary survey. Every year is the only kind of annual study that we kind of have in Churches of Christ that the ACU, Abilene Christian University, does every year. We're thankful for that. It's limited in what it can tell us. And then the only academic study studies that have been conducted about Church of Christ pastors were done by James Knapp and others back in 2009 and 2017, and we had him on the podcast last week to talk to us about those two studies. And the basic revelation from those studies was, like I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, Church of Christ pastors are over reliant on Social Security and IRAs, and those two things were like the only two sources of income over 50% of the participants were going to draw from in retirement from both studies. And so that's somewhat worrisome, and 28.7% in both studies had no plan to retire, because like we were saying, because probably they know they're not going to have enough money to be able to retire anyway. Thoughts on Knapp's two studies that you read?
Well, one thing I was just curious about is, so over-reliance on Social Security and IRAs. Well, what else are they suggesting outside of, like Roth IRAs and that kind of stuff? I mean, that was one of the questions that I, was thinking about.
Okay. Yeah. Well,
what are they even looking at?
I'm kind of in the same boat. Jordan and I have talked a little bit about this previously, but yeah, I think those, in many ways, are the two resources that we're all aware of. And not to jump the gun on a further question or some of the discussion, but I think the fact that that's both Jason and I's first thought. There is not a lot of financial education given to us in Church of Christ ministry. They're a big blindside. In fact, that's actually Lars and I are both part of a board for the Northwest Christian Network, and we're talking about what the big convention that we do in June is going to look like. One of the elements was like, hey, what would be really beneficial for ministers to be trained on, for pastors to hear about? And he immediately was like, well, from a practical perspective, taxes, finances, financial planning, and that would be really beneficial. It's not necessarily going to be a big draw because people don't realize how little they know about these things. But yeah, genuinely, I do think it's not surprising that Social Security and IRAs are what we're all kind of depending on, because those are the things we know about.
Yeah. We've spent some time talking about that on the podcast already, just how that default option kind of has changed from being more of a three-legged stool of having a pension. And so, Jason, if you had stayed in engineering or in the armed forces or as a contractor to the government or something like that, there might have been more of a pension aspect to your retirement in addition to your own, what would be like an IRA or personal savings, and then you've got your Social Security. And so in moving to the IRA 401k model, I think Jordan's paper has done a good education on that. Like, that is a shift that's taken place. And I don't think a lot of people think about that as a shift away from what was in place. And then we've had a couple conversations with people about real estate and how, ministers often don't own their own home. And so then that creates a part of the equation of equity that isn't there. But even beyond just your own home, real estate is, at least in certain certain pastors, that's often a hobby income, on the side, or a full-blown business of real estate.
Yeah.
But again, it's a passion project thing. It's not easy to get into.
And you have to be the sort of minister that doesn't say yes to everything that comes along, so you have the time to manage property.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Or you do what I do and live in it, and it's never finished. Jason doesn't know anything about that. So.
I've been working on my kitchen for a while. That's how the church knows I'm going to be around for a while, because my wife just said we're on the 5-year plan of remodeling this house.
There you go.
No, all right. Oh, it's funny.
But it is interesting. You talk about the military side of things or the government side of things. The government was doing a major transition. They had just done it before I got in there in 2000, where they were moving from the I can't remember what it's called, at SRS or CRS or something like that, the basically pension plan over to this one plan now that is basically a 401k. So the government was trying to shift over to that because they wanted the employees to take ownership of their plan versus just waiting for the government to take care of them.
Right. Okay, good stuff, guys. Lars, any other thoughts before moving on to the next question?
No, let's make them uncomfortable.
All right, let's make you guys uncomfortable and get vulnerable.
Since we're talking about money, we might as well be uncomfortable.
Yeah, that's right. So let me see if I can make this as awkward as possible. No, so basic not quantitative questions here, and we can get to the more qualitative questions after this. So, but what retirement vehicles are you currently utilizing, and ballpark for us, how much you would say you have saved up, and we'll get to follow-up questions after that, if you're comfortable sharing.
Yeah. I'll share if Jason goes first. No, I'm kidding. So I fit right into the statistically suggested lead pastor ballpark here. I have an IRA plan that actually began when I started at Newberg. It's a matching plan, so the church will match up to a certain percentage of my retirement, my contribution rather, and I've maxed it out every year that I've been here. It is the only retirement account that I hold. So you can extrapolate 3.5 years IRA, get the rough ballpark there. So yeah. And then Social Security, because I didn't know I could opt out until it was too late. So
that's great.
Yeah.
So your previous churches, were you offered anything in terms of retirement from them? No,
I was not.
Okay. Wow.
Actually, yeah. So to talk about previous congregations, when I worked in California, I was compensated more than fairly, I think, by the church that I worked with, but there were no side benefits. Not even regular benefits. And so, health insurance, my wife, Lorinda, worked at the school district and got us health insurance. She's got a retirement plan that's California PERS, and then she has an Oregon PERS retirement plan. Not that either of them have a particularly huge amount of money in them, working on a, special education assistant salary, but that's kind of where we're at. Working in Texas, it's really uncommon for churches in Texas to have, at least small churches in Texas,
which are a lot,
to have a retirement. Although there it was less concerning because my salary was, compared to cost of living, significantly higher. And so the fact that I didn't save at the time was more of a lack of education about financial awareness. So, yeah.
Okay, great. Jason.
So in some ways, it does happen with, your past and your history and stuff like that. So I worked for the government for 6 years, had a gift when I first showed up, had the retirement form sitting there, and it was like, how much are you going to put in? And I had a coworker who came walking over, and he was like, what is that? And I said, well, it's retirement. And he goes, what's the max? And I said, 10%. And he said, write 10% down there. Like, yes, sir. And I wrote 10% because he told me to. Because
do you remember that guy's name, and do you send him annual thank you notes?
Yeah, right. Yeah. Well, he was one of the guys super excited when I left to go into ministry, that he was like, for the job here, I'm disappointed that you're leaving. For the kingdom, I'm excited. So that was really cool. So I had a little bit of a nest egg to begin there, but I've been putting money in since then, and I'm way past everyone else. I'm in the 300,000 is where I'm at, and I'm 46. So I'm working towards that. The other thing is
that point where that curve is going to start working for you.
as long as we don't hit a recession, right?
Yeah.
But if we do, everybody does. So you don't stress. The other thing, like Lars was talking about in terms of housing, that was part of what I did too. I owned a home in Washington. I sold that. Fortunately, it was right at the top of the market in 2006. I bought in Corvallis in 2008, another fixer-upper. Worked on fixing that up, sold that house, and I was able here to buy a house here. And so having that, that blessing already is huge. And that in some ways came from a little old lady. I was at a church that was giving out free meals, and this little old lady was sitting there, and she's like, I'm so grateful that we actually own our house. Well, she does, because her husband's gone now. She's like, because once my husband left, she's like, I'd be living on the streets if I didn't own my home. And so that was a real big thing, because I told my wife, I said, I'm dying first, so I want to have her taken care of when I'm gone. So
Man,
that's great.
Hold you to that.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean,
literally or figuratively.
yeah. But I mean, honestly, I think these are important things. Like, you had someone come along and say, put 10% down. I mean, I have conversations with my dad all the time about retirement and different things, because that's kind of the relationship we have. And he's 10 years older than me, and we both were accounting majors and things. That's not the common experience for everyone. So, I think we need to get more comfortable with people. And actually, Jason, it's fun to be on this conversation, because this is kind of full circle for us in some ways. During my time at Fuller, had to make a phone call to someone that I trusted and do a very vulnerable, this is my budget, this is what we're spending our money on. And we had a conversation, and Jason was that person in my life that I wanted to do that with. And but I think we just as ministers are overconfident sometimes.
Yeah.
And so to be humble enough to say, I'm going to share where I'm at, whether it's I'm above or I'm below or I haven't started yet. It's not about where you're at. It's whether you're willing to be humble enough to have the conversation. And I assign this in both classes that I teach now at the university, at the undergrad level and the graduate level, to do an exercise where they write out their budget and then have a conversation with a trusted friend. They don't submit their budget to me as a professor. Like, I don't see how much money they're bringing in and what they're spending their money on. I get to see their reflection based on the conversation they had with that trusted friend. And that's something I think all pastors should be doing at least a couple times a year, or in a transition. If you've moved to a new church, find that person who you can do that with.
Okay. Awesome.
Amen.
So you might have read the rest of the introduction, where Teresa Ghilarducci says that the new class divide for Americans is one's level of retirement anxiety. So how would you rate your own level of retirement anxiety as a COC pastor living in the DIY retirement crisis from 0 to 10?
So before reading your paper, I would have said like 4 on a scale of 1 to 10. Yeah, okay. Retirement, I'm a little bit worried about. Okay. I'd be more worried if I weren't at least a little bit ahead of the other people my age, okay, according to the statistics. But I'm more worried about it. I don't know. It's interesting. I guess I'm not significantly more worried about it, but I am more worried about it. I'd say probably like a 5 or 6. Okay. It's made me consider, okay, here are the ways in which I can kind of hurry up a little bit.
Okay.
I feel really fortunate in that as soon as a congregation made available to me a retirement plan that they were going to contribute to, I took it full advantage of it, right? And it would have been great to have done that 10 years ago.
Yeah.
But at this point, to be ahead of the curve feels good. I'd like to be a little more ahead of the curve than I am. Maybe I'll be where Jason's at in 10 years. So
All right. What would you
Yeah,
say,
I don't
Jason?
think I don't spend a lot of time stressing over it. I mean, there's always that thought of, if a recession hits, but whatever. Can't do anything about that. But I spend time thinking about it.
Mm-hmm.
And we're gonna get into that more in terms of thinking about what what that looks like, and kind of my story of how I've gotten to that.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's been something that's been on my mind quite a bit, and so I plan for it and think about it. So I don't know where that would be. I'm not stressing over it, but I think about it and plan on it. So
Okay. Got it.
Yeah.
So why don't we just move on into that next question then, Jason, and go ahead and tell your story from the angle of retirement savings and now being a pastor in the Church of Christ.
Yeah. So I started out. My wife called me one day and said, "Hey, I'm taking this financial class at University of Wyoming," and she's like, "So you need to do, send me kind of what you spend your money on and stuff like that." And I said, "Okay, here's my wage. Here's what my expenses and stuff." And she calls me back sobbing, "You can't afford me." And I was like, my checking account continues to climb, and I don't know what's going on. I didn't put my overtime in there and those kind of things. So, but it began kind of this eye-opening thing. And then shortly after we got married, we got to partake in Dave Ramsey's Financial Peace University. And that was the first time I'd ever seen, a budget, a debt snowball, those kind of things. And we took it serious from the get-go of blowing out all of her school debt, my pickup debt, and just kind of getting rid of all of that and the blessing that was. So that was kind of the beginning of our journey. And then, Dave Ramsey's kind of mantra, live like nobody else so you can live like nobody else. That's what we said when we were in West Virginia. We got to go to West Virginia for 2 years and live there on the support that we could raise just to live, which was really good. And then when I came back to Corvallis, the church there, they offered us 10% of my income as retirement. And so I took that. It ended up being, I don't know, $330 or $40. And I took that money that I was getting and put that I took it as income because I had kids, and I was like, I'd rather take the tax hit now versus in the future. And I put it into a Roth IRA. So that was continuing my journey of having money in the bank for that. And then I've already told you about the house and stuff.
Okay.
So that's a big part of my financial journey.
Nice. Thank you for sharing that. Chris, how would you tell your story from that angle?
Yeah. So I made the financially wise decision of moving to a ministry position in Texas, and bought a house in the second year that I was there. First full year, but second year that I lived in Texas. Paid most of that house off in the first 3 years I owned it, and then made the financially unsound decision of moving to a ministry position in California. We sold our house in Texas, and slowly yet surely ate into our savings the entire time we lived in California. Again, completely clear. I think my salary at Walnut Creek was actually a really good salary for a youth minister with the length of experience that I had, the size of the congregation I worked with, but it was also an untenable salary for the area that I lived in. And so the idea of saving while living in California just completely disappeared. There was a slow yet steady trickle out of our bank account.
I get it.
We were fortunate not to pick up any debt while we were there, but we didn't make any progress. And we're still in a position now where we are not in debt for anything, but we don't own a home. With the way that the real estate market in the Northwest is, we're not sure when we're going to buy, but we're fortunately in a position where we think it might be within the next year and a half or so. So yeah, that's kind of where we're at. Again, the benefit of jumping into the retirement plan that I was offered wholeheartedly is that I'm less worried about it now than I would have been had I read your numbers while I was anywhere else for the last 3 years. And I feel like one of the other benefits that I've had while being at Newberg is we have an elder who is a tax professional. We have an elder's wife who her whole work is basically taxes and finances for
That's nice.
ministers. Does she do your taxes, Jason?
Yep.
Yeah, she does. I've asked that question to so many Northwest Church of Christ ministers. The answer has always been yes. I don't know of anyone that's been like, no, I don't go to.
Okay. You've been holding out on me now.
Yeah. Do you know Nancy Jones?
No, I don't know Nancy Jones.
I don't know
Black
Nancy.
sheep of the
Why don't
fold.
I know Nancy? I'm just in Northern California.
there you go.
I want to know Nancy.
Well, I'll point you to Nancy. But yeah, one of the benefits of moving to Newberg is there were a lot of like, hey, did you know you could do this? No, I had no idea. Nobody had ever told me that. So now I'm like calling up my former ministry colleagues, and I'm like, did you know? And pointing them in this direction and that. There's something to be said for the people within the congregation who have financial literacy being willing to share that with the ministers in their churches, because again, our educational institutions are failing us as far as that's concerned. I had like one semester where we spent like maybe a week talking about budgeting and finances for ministry specifically. I think we all had a Christian family class where like, this is how you create a budget with your spouse, but never had a real good, this is what it looks like, practically speaking, to manage your finances as a minister for 365 days, right?
Right.
So having people in our congregation here who are financially literate, and also by virtue of having loved ones in their lives that have made the mistakes that I've made or have not yet made but could make, it's really benefited me. And I feel like not everyone can come work at the Newberg Church of Christ, but if you could come intern for us for a year, we'll put you in the right track. So
Hey.
Yeah.
All right.
It's an interesting thing you bring up, Chris, about the education institutions. So Jason, you did Harding. Chris, I'm not sure where you went.
I was a Cascade kid.
Oh, you were a Cascade.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. Rest in peace.
What about your master's? Or do you have a master's?
No
master's. Okay, cool. So we got Freed, Harding, Cascade, Bushnell. Anyway, so I don't know, Jason, if Harding did anything in their master's program financially. No. Okay. So
masters.
What, we've asked the question, I think Ghilarducci says this, and she said it again in our podcast conversation with her, that education's not really the answer. Like, we can't really educate ourselves out of this national retirement crisis. It's not just about better classes or that everybody needs to take a class. But I am curious, from your point of view, your vantage point, what would have been beneficial to you now that you're, 10 years into ministry? What would have, or more, than that? But I'm just saying, you're well into your ministry. What would have been helpful when you were, fresh off of graduating and stuff that you wish you might have had?
Yeah.
Well, I did have it. That's Dave Ramsey, Financial Pastors University. But it changed my world.
Okay.
I'm at the place I am today because our church said, hey, we want to do this, and I jumped right on board with it, and not just being frugal, but being purposeful. So having that purposeful vision.
Mm-hmm.
Huge.
That's great. That's really great to hear.
I think that there are the rudiments of, of budgeting and the unique aspects of being a minister: housing allowances, non-reimbursable expense accounts, odd tax situations, those sorts of things being addressed before the first time that your taxes come around, before an elder tells you, in the hiring process, well, we're offering you this housing allowance, or we're offering you a parsonage, or having some better awareness. Now, some of that is also having the foresight to have connections with ministers who have been there before, right? But it was just stuff that was not discussed in any way in approaching my degree program. And so that would be, for me, awareness of the basics, the uniqueness of the ministry financial situation, especially within the churches of Christ. There are denominations that have, a hierarchical system, or a governing body, and, institutionalized systems for helping ministers manage their finances and things like that. In some ways, the Church of Christ is a little bit like the Wild West of ministry finances. And we're not alone. Obviously, all the statistics talk about how across denominational lines, this is an issue. But I think we're in a uniquely difficult position because there isn't like the Pope of the,
there's no headquarters, there's no pension system. It's a DIY.
A notice to churches to say, hey, this is what we're doing now for our ministers. This is how we're going to handle it. Because, as you said, education alone is not enough. It has to be, it can't just be the ministers who are educated about this situation. It has to be the church as a whole, which is really difficult when you don't have a unifying organization to say, hey, from here on out, this is how we're going to treat our ministers. This is how we're going to make sure that they can retire. This is how we're going to make sure that they have health care for them and their families. It can't be as systematic for the Church of Christ, but it needs to be something that's intentional, right? We have things like the Pepperdine lectures. We have things like the Northwest Christian Convention, where churches that don't have a governing body do get together and share information with one another. There's discussions happening, but it's almost all, again, these aren't necessarily the draws to events like that, discussions about money,
right?
But they are things that we should be doing. And I think educating those in leadership within the church, even if not educating pastors who are being hired by churches in these things, would be beneficial. And so it's kind of a double-edged sword. You could educate your ministers all day about what retirement plans should look like, how they should be managing their finances for the long term. And then they go and they tell their elders that, and their elders say, that's not how we've done it before, and we're not going to change. Right? Yeah. Congratulations, you've just stabbed yourself on the sort of knowledge that you have. Not that ever happens in ministry.
No. Yeah. So let's ask this question next. Do you think being in Churches of Christ has hurt or helped your asset accumulation for retirement? Explain.
Well, I think in some ways, you guys were just talking about that in terms of denominations helping build contracts versus in Churches of Christ. If you're in a place like Newburgh, or when I was in Corvallis, an elder was a financial advisor. That was his job. So if you're in a place where someone else is wise about that, it's going to be beneficial for you. If not, then you have to create it if it's going to happen.
Yeah.
Right.
I think, to agree with Jason there, it has been fortunate for me to be at Newburgh, but the previous years of ministry experience put me in a bad position for retirement. I did not benefit from a retirement perspective from that employment. Lots of other benefits that came with it, and experience and relational aspects, but until I got to Newberg, it just wasn't even a consideration in many ways.
Okay.
And I know a lot of guys who are Church of Christ ministers specifically, that have significant worry about their retirement plan. Not the amount of money that they have or a specific account, but what they will do when retirement comes around. Yeah.
Okay. Gotcha. Yeah. And so the next one I'd like to hit up is, what do you feel, and we've kind of touched on this already, what do you feel are the challenges to save for retirement as a pastor? And also, what benefits are there, if any, as a pastor within Church of Christ? Chris, you were just kind of alluding to some, there's other benefits, but what are the challenges and benefits to save for retirement as a COC pastor?
Yeah, I think one of the things that would probably need to be discussed is, what does it mean to have good stewardship or be good stewards of our money? One of the things that I've seen quite a bit is having a minister's salary be viewed as one of those like necessary evils, like the electricity. We just got to do it. How can we minimize it and make it the smallest possible? Because then we can have more money to do real ministry. And I think that attitude needs to be transformed within within churches, if they don't just want to be a clearinghouse of we'll give money here and just send it off, but that we're actually a body doing kingdom work in the community that we're at.
I think so. Along those lines, thinking about minister salaries in general, I have my own podcast. I'm not going to plug it, but we talk about this idea that churches post a job search listing, and we're going to set down this range of salaries we're willing to pay for this position. And sometimes they're outrageously broad ranges, like $60,000 to $120,000. Well, there's $60,000 in the middle there, right? Which of those two are you leaning towards paying? Well, it depends on experience. It depends on. No, here's the question that the churches should be asking: what is the value of this position and the work that we're asking a person to do? And there is something to be said for evaluating the value of the individual who's coming along, but you're paying them to do the job. You're paying them to do the work. And the question shouldn't be, how little can we pay this person? It should be, what is the value of the work towards the kingdom, right? And I think if more churches had that standpoint, that viewpoint, we're not going to put down a ridiculous range here. We know what the work is worth. We know what the value is, and we know what we can afford to do. We're not going to try and get a deal on our minister. I think that's I've seen churches do it. I've interviewed with churches that did that. I've received job offers from churches that did that and offered me the low end of the spectrum that they were offering. And it doesn't sit well with me. So
well, and what you're saying is that churches will put money into what they value. Just like people, we're talking about retirement, and if I want to have a good retirement, and that's a vision I have out there, I'm going to put money into that. If a church wants to have a top tier minister, then they're going to put money into that. And if they don't, I was talking to my wife kind of about this a little bit, and she was like, if people are offering Walmart wages, they're going to get a Walmart minister. So how do you expect this top tier when you're trying to get the best deal or lowball things?
And that's an aspect of that latest Christian Chronicle article. I go, hey, where are all the empty pulpits? Where are all the ministers? And it's been that way since the first generation of the Stone Campbell movement, where I'm hearing like there's such that antipathy for ministers and pastors that people were wary about entering into that vocation as a result of that on many different levels, including financially. Yeah, so that's just part of our DNA, our story of origin, and it's just it's interesting having tracked that now in light of like, hey, why are COC pastors bad at saving for retirement? Oh, let's go back to Alexander Campbell and Barton W. Stone, how they thought and how the earliest churches in that first generation operated. Oh, that makes sense now. Yeah.
Well, I hear a lot of ministers make the joke, oh, well, I don't think I'll ever actually retire. Well, that's all right if you don't actually retire, right? I think it's great if you want to become like a sojourner and go all across the U.S. and help churches out in different ways, or you want to go and fill in the pulpit for people who are needing a reprieve in smaller congregations or whatever. And if you retire with the ability to support yourself, that's not a difficult thing to do. That becomes like, hey, I get to work for the kingdom out of the abundance of what I have, saved, out of the thoughtfulness that I've had in my retiring. And if I get to, go to Florida to fill in a position and take my wife to Disney World, that's all right. I think there's something to be said for, Jason used that term, a good retirement. A good retirement is a retirement with purpose in it, right? But it's a retirement also that allows you to enjoy the fruit of your labor. It's a little bit of a Sabbath, and a lot of ministers don't get Sabbaths, period, to begin with, let alone the Sabbath that comes at the culmination of a long career of hard work.
Right.
Yeah. Well, you guys were talking a little bit about our movement in that way, and I was thinking about the freedom of being autonomous little churches and not having it all set up, is that we get to make this a little bit different, and it can be tailored a little bit different to the situation that maybe is there. And as we look ahead, maybe to the vantage of where church ministries are going to be, where they're not necessarily always going to have full-time, maybe it's one full-time person, but these different roles that are fulfilled, or maybe not any full-time, maybe this is a bivocational or trivocational person. And so that may adjust our vision of these things and retirement and compensation and all that. And I do think there's some opportunity there with our kind of freedom in this movement, but we have to be intentional about it. One of the ways that my dad talked about this with the church that he was kind of on leadership with was the salary, and then I think also the retirement and the benefits ought to be be consistent enough that the person doesn't have to be distracted chasing after those things.
Yeah.
So if we want this person to go after this mission or to be part of this thing, or to, as kind of the Jesus analogy of being incarnated, he had to kenosis, he had to empty himself of some things so he could be in flesh, he could live in the neighborhood, he could move into the neighborhood. Well, we've got to be able to let the pastor empty themselves of pursuing after retirement and all these other things by providing those things. And I think that's where, if you're a church in Newburgh, maybe it looks a little different than if you're a church in downtown Portland or Beaverton, where I grew up. The pastor might not be driving a BMW and living in a nice suburb. But in Beaverton, maybe that's true because all the people live and work at Intel and Nike and these other places. And so I don't think that we should be too quick to jump all over these variations in compensation and then also in retirement, because we're saying you're committing to the mission of God that's incarnated in this place. And if we started with that kind of discernment, what does it require retirement-wise, insurance, housing? What is required to incarnate the mission of God in this place? It's going to look different than it is in South America or Southern California or Eugene, and so I think we do want to take that into consideration. The values. I was listening as Jason was talking about that. Like, have a vision. You're going to give to what you value, and if you have a vision for what retirement's going to be like, you're going to contribute to it. And I don't think a lot of us do. We think about it being, I'm going to go play golf every day. I tried that; it hasn't worked. But anyway,
Too expensive.
Well, you're not retired yet. That's the problem.
well, I took a 6-week retirement, in between churches, and not really. It was like a sabbatical on my own, and it was a hole that I had to dig myself out of. But yeah, try and get the church to pay for your sabbatical.
Every great golfer I've ever golfed with was over the age of 60. I'm just saying.
Okay.
There you go.
Yeah.
I was a great golfer at the VA 9-hole course in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, with little dime-sized greens, but that was about
Absolutely.
it. All right.
Well, you had asked the question, though, if there are any benefits of being a pastor within the CFC.
Yeah.
And I think there are, as Lars was saying, the benefit of local autonomy. There are benefits to that, in that we get to make choices about what our congregation is going to do, how we're going to respond to social issues, how we're going to approach needs within our community without having to run it up the ladder. Essentially, the highest ladder I have is one rung, and that's kind of nice, or 2 rungs, I guess. However I want to, phrase that. But the idea is that we don't have to go far to get the answer on what are we going to do about this as a congregation. You don't always have the clarity that you get when it's like, nope, this is how our group responds to this from above, right? But you have the freedom to be able to make choices that might not otherwise be made. And so that's a huge benefit, something I would never be willing to give up, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, no, yeah. I would say there's some flexibility and agility because Church of Christ are autonomous. And there are other vehicles out there where you don't really necessarily need a big bureaucratic system to be able to become a part of whether a pension or a 401k. What I discovered as a financial professional in training, you want to be, and I learned about a couple of vehicles, the Index Universal Life, Fixed Index Annuity, among other things. And I was like, wow, I never knew these before. This might be super helpful for ministers, pastors, and Churches of Christ. Let's look into that. Let's see if that would be helpful. And the more I learn, the more I'm like, yeah, this kind of makes sense. So I'm not a financial professional anymore, but it led me into talking and writing about this subject. So question 8, guys, what do you feel is the theological or ethical ideal in terms of saving for living in retirement? Like what stands out to you in terms of the gospel and Jesus and his ethic that helps you understand what's that balance of saving for retirement in Christian life?
Yeah, it's kind of intriguing because you you begin with Jesus saying, I don't have a place to lay my head, and I think there's that kind of gets grabbed onto for many, many of the people in our churches of, oh, that's what you're supposed to be like if you're going to be a minister, and that's that kind of vow of poverty kind of concept.
Yeah.
But then there's the aspect of paying and being paid for for what you do, and so there's I don't know, I go back to, mostly for me, is that taking care of those that have need within the church, and being people who are going to take care of of those, and part of that is taking care of your minister, just like we would take care of our widows, and and our orphans and those that are in need, and what do we value? So
God's people have always had a group that was dependent on the support of the rest of the group. Reading through Deuteronomy recently, something that really stood out to me was this idea that like everybody gets a share in the land, but not you, Levi, right? Your share is going to come from what the people give to me, and and there's a huge blessing in that. It's also a really humbling idea that like what the people are giving to God, the Levites are benefiting from. And there's a huge benefit that they give in return to the people, right? We are going to facilitate God's relationship with his people. We are going to be these intermediaries who facilitate this relationship and help to strengthen and build and grow it and represent in many ways God to the people. And there's, I think obviously we believe in the priesthood of all believers, but I think it's fair to say that Paul also believed that there were people within the church that were doing that kind of work, that were helping to facilitate God's presence to the people, offer them prophetic words, share with them the works that God intended for them, and to do the works that God intended for the church. And I think it's fair to say that God's expectation is for some of us to be reliant on the church while also supporting the church in things that they can't necessarily facilitate for themselves. And retirement is a part of being supported by the people. What is our share? What is our inheritance? What are we expected to live into our ripe old age on? And I think that I think it's a faithful thing for God's people to support ministers well enough to retire. And Jason had brought up the phrase stewardship earlier, or maybe it wasn't stewardship. Maybe it was stewardship.
I think it was, yeah.
But the idea that we do have a responsibility then to manage what the body has given to us well, not to go and spend frivolously in ways that dishonor the gift that we've been given, the share that God has intended for us in some way, facilitated through his people. And so I think it's a kind of a beautiful symbiosis. The church is reliant on the minister, and the minister is reliant on the church, and we're all reliant on God, just for different things that God has offered to us. So and it's kind of like that body metaphor that Paul likes to use. Everybody, part of the body is reliant upon the other. And then what I look into in the theological chapter, I don't know if you peeked at that at all, but it's the Nazareth Manifesto that Jesus frames his ministry in, of that Jubilee ethic of everybody's going to get their land back, and there's going to be no poor people among you. And so for the ministers and pastors that serve within the community that should be living according to the Jubilee ethic, they should be like exhibit A of what it's like to thrive within a Jubilee community. And so, Okay, and so question 9, what have you done well and what do you need to do differently? Churches too. We've touched on this already, so if there's anything you haven't said, like, now's the time to say it. So what do you think?
All right, one thing I did super well, I married a good woman.
Hey.
Amen.
but she's it's so cool because she is frugal. And she's content with like I would describe it, a minimalist lifestyle. We have plenty, but we don't have to go get coffee every day. We don't have to go do all of these things. We can live within our means so that we can save, and having a partner within that has been amazing. So that's a huge one right there.
I'd say the same. Lorinda is a very thrifty person. She's good about taking a little and making a lot out of it. And I am, what's the phrasing? There's the free spirit and the level-headed individual. I don't know what the nice phrase for that is. Lorinda is in many ways the level-headed individual when it comes to impulse spending, and I'm the free spirit. And she's done a good job of checking me on that, which is why we don't carry a big old load of debt, because if I were left to my own devices, they're offering me $50,000 right here, I'm going to go spend it on whatever I want. And so I I very much live in the moment most of the time, and Lorinda has been a good balance to me in that way. I think, another thing, again, when you, for every minister out there, when you are offered a retirement plan, do it. Go for the maximum. Do what you can. Optimize it to the greatest possibility. Even if it's just, they said that they'll pay me 3%, a matching, amount up to 3% or 5% or whatever. Match it. Do the match and take advantage. The joke about give yourself a raise, right? It's the easiest thing in the world to do.
Well, I think even ask for it too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Ask for it.
If it's not, that's what Sean did when he got here, my predecessor. There was not a retirement plan, and he told the church, this is untenable for ministry in the future. I have a retirement plan, but I need you to make this a possibility for all of the staff at the church. And so even our admin can participate in it. Nice. If our part-time janitorial service wanted to participate, we have a few members that do the janitorial work. They would be allowed to participate in it. It's very important to our church. And so, yeah, hop on it. Don't be afraid, and don't be afraid to ask, like Jason said. Yeah. So, yeah, if I would do anything differently, I would have asked, 10, 15 years ago. So.
Got it. Yeah. Like one of the things I think about in my theology chapter is, what does it look like to help not just the minister in terms of a Jubilee community, thrive financially, in this regard in terms of saving for retirement, but everybody, like every member, and because there's going to be a majority of Americans within this American DIY retirement crisis are going to be poor or in elder poverty as a result of this situation, and therefore, like, okay, what is our role as the church to help others, to help everybody out in this regard? It's going to be interesting to see what that looks like. The more and more boomers that retire by the time of, like, let's say 2050. Yeah, it's going to be interesting.
I think that's I think that's where you guys are talking about things that you're done and things that maybe you would have told your younger self or something like that, or a young pastor now. It's like, take those things that are offered to you, ask when you can. But I think most of all, we're trying to shift an imagination of ourselves, an imagination about how we view money and retirement, but also our congregation and our people. And then we get to be this, the microcosm moving its way out, being change agents for the culture, right? We're not trusting in princes or presidents or congressmen to change the debt crisis or the retirement crisis. We are saying the community of God has something to offer. And I use the analogy, and I don't remember who started with it, but it's in a lot of theological literature about scarcity mindset. It's something that secular people are talking about as well, that scarcity doesn't work well. I'm in the fundraising business now. Never thought I would be, but that's what I do at the university. And we talk a lot about how it's not a problem of there's not enough money out there. There's too much money out there, actually. But it's helping people capture a vision for what they can do with it differently. And I think the same would be true for us, is that we need to move away from the imagination that I don't have enough. Yeah. I'm not making enough. I'm not going to have enough to retire. No. There's plenty. There is enough for all. When we are humble enough to be kind of dependent, as you were talking about, Chris, kind of this mutuality with the church, and do the things like Jason's story about Greg, just saying this is a need, and people stepped up, and it wasn't like, oh, well, we're concerned that the pastor's greedy or something. No. If we're willing to be humble enough to show our need, there is enough in this community. And I think it's one of the great ways the church could become the church again, is actually to be financially dependent and stuff, and interdependent on each other, rather than kind of these little silos. And on Sunday we pool together a little bit of money to do something. What if we took more risks and said there is enough, and we moved away from that scarcity mindset. It's
about,
something I keep trying to help churches change their imagination about.
Yeah, you think about, and I don't want to take it too much out of context, but James 4, you do not have because you do not ask, right?
Yeah.
I had an elder quote that to me. This was way back in Texas. I was having a rough time financially for about 3 months when Emma got really sick, and we couldn't afford the medical bill. And I was really stressing out about it. We had, no money to be able to afford this because we didn't have insurance again. And so I finally, broke down crying in one of my elders meetings, and I'm like, I think I'm going to be bankrupt. And they were like, well, what's the problem? And I was like, we have this $10,000 bill that's come due and we can't afford it. And my elder looked at me, he said, you do not have because you do not ask. And that night they wrote the check. I mean, it was, to make the point that Lars is making, I've never once asked elders in a church for a legitimate need that I had that wasn't met. Right. If it was something that I could verify, like, hey, this has come up, I need help with this. And, I think that there's something to be said for that. There is an abundance in the church. Even in the smallest churches I know, there are people who are ready and willing to give in ways that we don't think they would. But if we don't ask, we'll never know whether or not they'd give, whether or not they would help in ways that we very much need it. And it's not just financial ways either. There are 1,000 ways that if we don't ask people for help, first of all, we're denying them the opportunity to be a blessing to us, right? But then we're also just assuming that maybe their love is too small to be able to care about our situation.
Nice. Thank you for that, Chris. So last question before we wrap up, because we're running out of time. And you might have already mentioned some of these things, but what would you tell a new pastor in training about saving for retirement before they jump in or right after they've gotten in?
Yeah, this is something I think about a lot because with working with college students, I was always talking about it. But we have an apprentice here who just started. It's just in the beginning of his ministry. And so these are conversations that we're going to have and already have started having. And the beginning is start early. Even if you feel like you can't, give anything, start putting into like a Roth IRA right now. Start doing that.
Yeah.
And then the other thing I would say is consider the church that you go to. Don't just go to a church that is offering the most money, but go to a church that is going to love you and support you. When I came over here, I actually took a pay cut from campus ministry to come over to this church. We're in a town of about 10,000, maybe 11,000 now people. And I took a pay cut because I'm like, these people love me. And as they're able, they've been saying, hey, we're going to continue to give you a raise and different things. But they also, go to a place that's going to support you in other ways as well. Lars mentioned a sabbatical. Go to a place that says, hey, you need to, the church I'm at, I say, hey, I need to go to the mountains to do a visioning retreat here for the next 3 days. And they're like, sure, go. They can't support as much financially, but they can support in other areas. So
church
those are
your
two big
children
ones.
and your wife. A church that definitely sabbaticals are great, but even just saying, hey, we're gonna pay for you to go to this expositors seminar with Jason Swick, and get to eat meals up at Camp Yamhill and hear 40 ministers snoring in the middle of the night. But a church that is willing to invest in you as a person is a benefit as well. That recognizes that you need time off, that you need continuing education, that you need any number of things. There's a lot of benefit to that. And top of my list is, are they going to love my family? Are they going to put their needs, if I get hit by a bus tomorrow, I'm not worried. I mean, emotionally and spiritually, I'm worried about my children in the sense that dad is important, but I'm not worried about how they're going to be taken care of financially, because I know the church loves my family. I know what they would do if I were gone. And there's something to be said for the security that comes with that. So,
all right.
I
Lars,
don't plan on getting hit by a bus tomorrow.
Oh,
okay.
yeah. Just, I want to say thanks to you guys for sharing and being vulnerable. And yeah, I mean, I think sometimes money is like that bus that it can be rough. And to hearing your guys' stories, even both of you, about medical things. I know many of my friends, it's their first kid or their second kid. I know for my wife and I, we were on a health sharing plan, and that was an interesting thing. Whereas before, we were on a different medical insurance. So I think these are very real reasons why we don't end up saving, or why we are nervous about finances. And as you think about retirement, it's a season of life where you tend to go to the doctor more often. And so, I think there are aspects that our health and our well-being as a pastor, our soul, is worth caring about, is a vision worth investing in. And so I'm grateful for you guys spending some time and just sharing personal stories. And I'm hopeful that the project will be really, really beneficial to new pastors, but also wherever you're at in that journey. If you're behind the curve, that you've maybe picked up on a few things or throughout the conversation. And I know we've got more good things to come, Jordan. So grateful for this.
Yeah. It's been a fun journey thus far. And you were talking to me the other night, Lars, about season 2. I'm like, hold on, man. Hold on. We're not even done with season 1 yet.
Almost Essential podcast, Almost Essential, season 2 coming to you in 2026.
Barring a recession.
Well, and hopefully,
when you take a sabbatical from doing your podcast, right?
hopefully, this will be information that'll get out there, so that people start. If you couldn't start early, start now. Do something now, engage now. There was one thing I was thinking about telling. I actually just told our new apprentice, and that was develop a side hustle. So for me, and be at a church that allow that. So for me, I got tired of yelling at basketball refs, and so now I became a basketball ref.
Right.
With high school and middle school, so I get to be out, create community. I get paid to exercise, basically.
Nice.
And it's a great thing to be rejuvenated by, but just to find those little things that you can do outside of ministry are going to be life-giving.
No, that's good advice. Yeah. Side hustle, staying healthy physically, working out. Yeah. Yep. Awesome. So guys, again, Jason, Chris, Lars, thank you so much for being with us today on this episode. Wish you all the best in your ministry endeavors up in Oregon. All right. I just had the advantage of opportunity to visit Oregon back in December. Had a great time, except for the flight on the way back got canceled a couple times, and that whole holiday mess. But that was an adventure.
What part of Oregon were you visiting?
I was in Portland visiting the Salem area.
What?
Yeah, I know.
Jordan.
I know. Look,
you and I are going to have words.
You didn't come see me either, Chris. So don't feel too bad.
That's okay. That's okay.
I'll get up there.
I was busy anyway. No,
we were going to come see you because I bought Dude Perfect tour tickets a couple of years ago, but then the pandemic kind of canceled their tour for like a year. COVID happened. And so I ended up giving the tickets to somebody else. I think Lars, I remember you gave them to somebody else.
It was my cousin's kids. Yeah.
But we were going to stay with Chris, maybe camp out in his yard or something. I don't know, but we'll make our way back up there sometime soon, guys. Yeah.
You can always come camp out in my yard. Always.
Sweet. All right. Well, take care, guys. Our listener and viewers, thank you for watching and thank you for listening to this episode. We'll be back with several more episodes on this very same topic and more conversations with other pastors from different regions of this country. Thanks again, and we'll see you later.
Once again, thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Almost Essential podcast. If you like what you heard and you want to reach out, you can connect with me, Jordan Koss, on Facebook or Instagram. We hope this series is a valuable resource for you, pastor or otherwise. And remember, you are not almost essential. Your role and service in the church is essential, as well as saving for retirement within your holy vocation and calling.